Now the U.S. Supreme Court has spoken. Let there be no doubt. While I strongly disagree with the court's decision, I accept it. I accept the finality of this outcome, which will be ratified next Monday in the Electoral College. And tonight, for the sake of our unity as a people and the strength of our democracy, I offer my concession.
There were moments of candor almost unparalleled for the usually restrained vice president. The pain of failing to carry his home state, for example.
As for what I'll do next, I don't know the answer to that one yet. Like many of you, I'm looking forward to spending the holidays with family and old friends. I know I'll spend time in Tennessee and mend some fences, literally and figuratively.
And those who know Gore well say this is a hint that he's sure to try again in 4 years.
Some have asked whether I have any regrets. And I do have one regret, that I didn't get the chance to stay and fight for the American people over the next 4 years, especially for those who need burdens lifted and barriers removed, especially for those who feel their voices have not been heard. I heard you, and I will not forget.
After the speech, throngs of White House staffers stood waiting to cushion his defeat, and Gore set off for home amid their cheers. And Katie, he came home to a party here at his residence that lasted to the wee hours of the morning. Campaign workers, guests like labor leader John Sweeney, singer John Bon Jovi. From my reporting, Gore was last seen holding onto a bottle of beer, dancing with his wife. Then Tipper was later playing the drums. I'm also told that the Gore family is going to try to get away for a long weekend this weekend, and they're looking for some privacy. So far, they're not telling anyone where they're going, Katie.
All right, Claire Shipman. Claire, thank you very much. Let's check in again with Tim Russert. Tim, it seems to me that Al Gore had to really accomplish 3 things. He had to be magnanimous. He had to express some kind of displeasure with the Supreme Court decision. At least he had to have some kind of response. And he obviously kept the door open for 2004. Do you think he achieved all those things?
3 for 3. He was gracious and credible, Katie. He said he disagreed with the court. He said he was disappointed about losing. He said he was going to go back home and mend fences. All those things are exactly the right tone. People would not have believed him if he said, you know, this doesn't bother me. Congratulations to the winner. Quite the opposite. Al Gore believes very deeply he won this election. I was quite taken by his first phrase, Katie. I congratulate Governor Bush on becoming the president, not winning the election. I thought that was quite striking.
Do you think you're reading too much into that, Tim, or do you think that was a deliberate choice of words?
Oh, I think it was very deliberate, but does not detract in any way from the extraordinary, magnanimous and gracious speech that Al Gore gave. I thought it was perhaps the best of his career.
Let's talk about his political future. You know, he did say, I will not forget. My only regret that I will not be able to fight for you. Clearly, you got the sense that he was saying, I'll be back. The question is that realistic? Will he be back, Tim?
Well, you know, on election night, if he had lost a clear-cut defeat, most people would have written him off saying, how could a vice president in these economic times lose a race like this? But because of the last 5 weeks and the way he lost, one Gore advisor said, we much prefer to lose by the Supreme Court decision than by a recount, because it will linger in people's minds whether or not we really had won the election. The leader of the Democrats in the Senate, Tom Daschle, leader of the Democrats in the House, Dick Gebhardt, have both said that Al Gore is the leading contender in 2004. I think he'll be challenged. I think, in his words, he'll have to fight for it, but he certainly is very much in the running.
And finally, I know that you and Matt talked about style over substance with George W. Bush. Style-wise, how do you think Al Gore did? He seemed more relaxed than usual and more conversational.
Perfect word. Is the most conversational, self-deprecating speech I've ever heard him give. It's much more like the Al Gore you meet in an informal setting than you have seen on the campaign stump. I think that he did the country an enormous amount of good, and I think he helped himself politically as well.
All right, Tim, thank you so much.
Thanks,
We're going to
Katie.
be talking with you again in a few minutes. It's 7:14. Once again, here's Matt.
Katie, thank you. The question now is, how will a divided Congress function with George W. Bush? Congressman David Bonheur is the House Democratic Whip, a member of the Democratic leadership. Congressman Bonheur, good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you, Matt?
I'm fine, thanks. I know you watched both speeches. Did these guys do enough to put this election controversy behind us?
Well, let's say that they've reached out to each other and they've tried to bind the heels of the country, and I think Tim's comments about the vice president's speech, where he actually stole every word that I was going to use with respect to the speech itself. It was generous, it was conciliatory, it was self-deprecating in a humorous way, and it was very poignant. I was moved deeply by the Vice President's thoughts about his regrets not being able to fight for people who need to be stood up for.
But you stopped short a second ago of saying this puts the election mess behind us.
Well, I want to say something about the speech by the governor, too, because I thought it was also reaching out. I thought the tone was good. I thought he did express a sense of humility that was I think, appropriate for the results of this election. But one of the things I was disappointed in, and that was this election was more than just, it became more than just about two men or two parties. It became about really the right to vote, and I was disappointed that issue was not addressed. He has to dig a little deeper, I think, and understand the deep, bitter feeling some people still have with respect to the electoral problems that we have in this country.
So when you said on December 3rd, I think it was, quote, I think we have a constitutional crisis in this country and the legitimacy of the presidency is at stake, you still feel that way?
Well, I said that only if, in fact, this went to the Florida legislature and it went to the Congress to be decided. I accept the Vice President view with this that George Bush is now our elected president and that we have to come together.
Obviously, Governor Bush, now President-elect Bush, was trying very hard to reach across the aisle to Democrats. As someone who will be sitting across that aisle, are Democrats going to be willing, and let's be honest, some are very resentful about what happened here, are they going to be willing to reach back?
I think they will. I think people will come together. I think that the governor can help himself immeasurably. Maybe this wasn't the time or the right place for the speech for him to do the issue of electoral and political reform because it raises, again, the question of the legitimacy problem. But he needs to do that, and I think he needs to do that soon. And when he does that, I think you will find more people reaching and embracing an effort to try to bring people together. He also, the governor, the president-elect, needs to, I think, reach out to his own party and to his own leaders, because I think there is a concern that some of us have in the Congress, and I think the country in general,
right,
that some of his leaders now will want to take him on a path, on a far-right path, and I think that would be dangerous.
Congressman David Bonheur. Congressman, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Representative Christopher Cox is chairman of the Republican Policy Committee. Congressman Cox, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt.
You just heard what Congressman Bonheur said. Does Governor Bush have more work to do?
Well, of course, he has the entire 4 years of his administration ahead of him now. I met yesterday with Vice President-elect Dick Cheney, who now can begin in earnest the job of the transition. As you've just reported, the money for the transition will finally be made available. The FBI background checks can now begin for potential people serving in the administration. And, of course, the budget of the United States that the President is required to submit 13 days after he's sworn into office can now begin to be prepared in earnest. All of these things normally would have been underway for the last 36 days, but really last night was the end of the election. It was election night for Americans. Usually we see these speeches way before Thanksgiving, and so part of the feeling of relief that was brought about by the two extraordinary speeches, and I agree with all that have gone before me in their conclusions that those were wonderful speeches. Part of the effect of those speeches, and the reason that they were so effective, is that it feels good to stop beating your head against the wall. We've all been unwilling parties to a lawsuit this last month, and it's finally over, and we can begin this process of healing that both the victor and Vice President Gore talked about.
How is George W. Bush going to work with the right in his own party? People who supported him during the campaign are now going to say, okay, all this talk about reaching across and working with the Democrats is great, but we've got some things on our agenda that we want to get done.
Well, I think the same way that you work with people on the left. What I have found consistently in the leadership in the Congress is that we are successful in our legislative endeavors when we focus on substance, when we work on the things that the American people care about. When President Bush, President-elect Bush last night talked about reconciliation, he followed it quickly with progress. That's what people expect and want. We can set aside our differences best when we find common ground, not on everything, but on those things that are before us. Obviously, the themes that President-elect and Vice President-elect Bush and Cheney, respectively, selected for their campaign have a lot of bipartisan prospect. Tax relief is something that Vice President Gore himself campaigned on. Education reform. Everyone wants to improve our public schools, and it's vital that we do so. Local control is a means of doing so that both Democrats and Republicans can agree on. So I think we have a great opportunity ahead of us, and I'm glad that we're finally getting started on it.
Congressman Cox, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. Once again.